The little piece of paper with the bill landed on top of my shrimp shells, like a sentence handed down by a corrupt judge, pushed by the greasy fingers of my own son. I am Adelaide. I am 72 years old, and for 4 decades I was the queen of flowers at the wholesale flower district. They think I'm an old, rusty piggy bank, but they forgot that the most beautiful roses always have the sharpest thorns. Vance's Harbor Seafood and Steakhouse was packed that Sunday. The clatter of silverware hitting the china, the laughter of families at neighboring tables, and the intense smell of garlic and melted butter filled the air. It was one of those expensive places with starched white tablecloths that scratch your elbows and wine glasses so big they look like fish bowls. The kind of place my son, Robert, loves to show off, as long as he does not have to open his wallet. I was sitting at the head of the table, although no one had offered me that spot out of respect, but rather because it was the place where I was least in the way for the waiters to serve the wine. Robert, my only son, the boy I carried on my back while unloading trucks of carnations at 4 a.m, was sitting to my right. He was no longer that little boy. He was now a 45-year-old man with his belt squeezing his belly and a receding hairline that he tried to hide by combing his hair to the side. To my left was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, a woman who always looked at me as if I were a damp stain on her freshly painted wall. And in front of me, my 15-year-old grandson, Georgie, who had not even looked up from his cell phone to greet me when I arrived. "Mom, are you not going to order dessert?" Robert asked while wiping the sauce from his lips with the cloth napkin. "They have a tiramisu that is out of this world." "No, thank you, son. I am already full with the mineral water and the appetizer we shared," I replied, smoothing the tablecloth with my hands, full of age spots and scars from cut stems. "Oh, Adelaide, always so austere," Vanessa commented, rolling her eyes as she touched up her lipstick in the reflection of a spoon. "That is why you never enjoy anything. Life is for living, do you not think?" I wanted to tell her that life is enjoyed when you earn your bread with the sweat of your brow, not when you live off the income of a widowed mother. But I bit my tongue. I had been biting my tongue for years. Ever since I sold my 3 shops in the flower district and retired, they assumed my bank account was a bottomless pit destined to finance their whims. Lunch had been a parade of excess. Robert had ordered the largest seafood platter on the menu, the one that comes with lobster, octopus, and crab. Vanessa had demanded a bottle of imported wine, complaining that the domestic one gave her a headache. Georgie had ordered 2 main courses because he was a growing boy, even though he left half of both. I, on the other hand, had ordered my bottle of mineral water and had nibbled on a little bread with butter, taking care of my digestion and, honestly, taking care of my patience. I looked at my hands on the table. They were strong hands, hands that knew how to tell a fresh tulip from a frozen one just by touching a petal. Hands that had counted bills, signed checks, and closed deals with rough truck drivers in the early hours of the morning. At what point did my family start seeing these hands only as cash dispensers? "Well, family, what a feast," Robert exclaimed, patting his stomach and letting out a discreet but audible burp. "Waiter, the damage, please." The waiter, a young, thin boy with a tired face, approached with the black leather folder. I had been watching him during the service. His name was Mike, according to his name tag. He ran from one side to the other, putting up with the snapping of Robert's fingers and Vanessa's complaints because the ice was not cold enough. He reminded me of the loaders at the market, humble boys who worked hard to bring something home. Mike placed the folder gently in the center of the table, near Robert. An uncomfortable silence fell. Vanessa looked up at the ceiling, feigning interest in the light fixtures. Georgie put his headphones on. Robert took the folder, opened it, whistled when he saw the total, and then, with a quick and shameless movement, slid it across the table until it hit my plate. "You pay, old lady," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Your pension is only good for this, to treat us every once in a while. Besides, you do not spend on anything. You live locked up in that old house." I felt a chill run down my spine, colder than the air conditioning in the restaurant. It was not the first time they had asked me for money, but it was the first time they had done it with such cruelty, with such public disdain. "Excuse me?" I whispered, hoping I had heard wrong. "Oh, mother-in-law, do not play deaf now," Vanessa chimed in, laughing with that shrill little giggle that drilled into my ears. "Robert is right. You have your pension and the money from the sale of the shops hidden under your mattress. We have debts, the kids' private school, the car payment. It is the least you can do for the family." I looked at Robert. I searched his eyes for the little boy who used to give me drawings made with crayons, for the young man who promised to take care of me when his father died. I found nothing. I only saw a selfish, comfortable man used to mommy fixing everything. "The bill is $800, Robert," I said, looking at the total. It was a fortune for a single lunch. I only drank water. "Enough with the water!" Robert slammed the table, making the glasses vibrate. "It is a family Sunday, Mom. Stop being so cheap. What do you want the money for? To take it to the grave? Pay and let us go. The game starts in half an hour." The waiter, Mike, was still standing by the table. I saw him look down, embarrassed. His eyes met mine for a second, and I saw something that hurt me more than my son's words. I saw pity, sorrow. "Poor old lady," his eyes said. That pity was the fuel that lit the bonfire inside me. I was not a poor old lady. I was Adelaide, the woman who built an empire of petals and thorns in a man's world. I had negotiated with suppliers who tried to scam me. I had survived economic crises, frosts that killed entire crops, and premature widowhood. And now this pair of parasites thought they could humiliate me and squeeze my wallet dry with a mocking smile. Slowly, very slowly, I reached for my cane. It is not just any cane. It is made of oak wood with a solid silver handle in the shape of an eagle's head. It was a gift from my husband when I turned 50. "So you can lean on it, but also so you can rule," he told me. I stroked the cold silver with my thumb. "You are right," I said, with a voice so calm that even Georgie took out one earbud to listen. "Money is meant to be used." Robert smiled triumphantly. Vanessa gave him a knowing nudge. They thought they had won. They thought the old lady had caved, as always. I opened my worn leather handbag. I took out my coin purse, that small one with a clasp that Vanessa always thought was tacky and in bad taste. I started rummaging through the coins. "Hurry up, Mom, we do not have all day," Robert huffed. I took out a $5 bill and 3 single dollars. I stacked them carefully on the white tablecloth, one by one, making a small rustling sound that contrasted with the bustle of the restaurant. $8, I said out loud. That is how much the mineral water costs on the menu. I saw it before ordering. Robert let out a nervous laugh. "Very funny, Mom. Now take out the card, that black one you have hidden." I snapped the coin purse shut with a sharp click. Then I closed my bag. I leaned on my cane and stood up. My knees creaked a little, but I stood firm, straighter than I had in the last 10 years. "That is my share," I said, staring right at my son. "My pension, as you call it, is mine, and I earned it getting up when you were still dreaming of little angels. I earned it carrying boxes, fighting over prices, and enduring the freezing cold. It is not to pay for your lobsters or your wife's expensive wine." Robert's smile vanished. Vanessa opened her mouth in indignation, looking like a fish out of water. "But Mom, what are you doing? We did not bring cash." Robert stammered, lowering his voice as he noticed people at nearby tables starting to stare. "My credit card is maxed out." "That is not my problem, son," I replied with a lethal softness. "You are adults. You are in your 40s. If you know how to order lobster, you should know how to pay for it." "You cannot do this to us," Vanessa shrieked, forgetting her high society lady pose. "It is an absolute embarrassment. They are going to have us arrested." I turned to the waiter, Mike, who was watching the scene with wide eyes, but with a spark of respect blooming in his gaze. "Young man," I told him, placing my hand on his arm, "here are my $8 for the water. Sadly, I cannot include the tip because I did not consume anything that deserved it from my companions. But let me leave you a piece of advice. Never let anyone treat you as if you are invisible. Mike nodded, almost imperceptibly. Mom, if you leave, I swear that… Robert began to threaten, turning red with rage. That what, Robert? I interrupted him, gently tapping the floor with my cane. Are you not going to visit me? Are you not going to call me? If you only call me for this, son, you are doing me a favor. I turned around. The walk to the restaurant exit felt like the aisle of a church on my wedding day, or the aisle of the market the day I opened my third shop. Every step resonated with dignity. I felt the stares of the diners pinned to the back of my neck. Some murmured, others held back their laughter, seeing the panicked faces of my son and daughter-in-law. Upon reaching the glass door, I paused for a second, not out of doubt, but to savor the moment. I heard Robert yelling at the waiter, trying to explain the unexplainable. I heard Vanessa saying it was an outrage, and I heard the manager approaching with a firm voice. I stepped out onto the street. The afternoon sun hit my face, warm and bright. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of freedom, gasoline, and the living city, but it no longer smelled of the humiliation of the rancid garlic from that table. I walked to the bus stop. I was not going to take a cab. I wanted to feel the movement of the city. I wanted to see real people. While I waited, I took out my cell phone, an old but functional model. I had 3 missed calls from Robert. I turned it off. I sat on the metal bench at the bus stop. My hands were shaking a little, not out of fear, but from the adrenaline I had not felt in years. It was that same electricity I felt before a big sale on Mother's Day. I remembered the face of Mike, the waiter. I remembered the half-eaten mountain of seafood on the table. And I thought of Robert and Vanessa, sitting there with an $800 bill and empty pockets. Let us see if washing dishes teaches them what a penny is worth, I muttered to myself, and a genuine smile formed on my face, a smile that came from deep within my gut. But this was not going to end here. I knew my son. He would come to my house. He would come screaming, demanding, manipulating. He would come to try and regain control. What he did not know was that Adelaide, the florist from the market, had just woken up from a long nap, and she had much more than a silver cane to defend herself with. The bus arrived puffing gray smoke. I climbed aboard with agility, paid my fare with the coins I had left, and sat by the window. As the vehicle moved forward, distancing me from that snobby restaurant, my mind started working. I had properties they knew nothing about. I had contacts they could not even imagine. And above all, I had an old leather notebook hidden at the back of my closet where I had written down every single cent I had lent them over the last 20 years. Today's bill was just the beginning. The real collection was about to start. I looked out the window and saw my reflection in the glass. I no longer saw a useless old woman. I saw a strategist. The game had changed, and this time I had the marked cards. The bus turned the corner and the restaurant disappeared from my sight. But the image of my family trapped without money stayed etched in my mind like the best painting I had seen in years. Today I paid for my mineral water, yes, but tomorrow they would pay for everything else. The key turned in the lock of my door with a soft click, a sound that had always felt like the most honest welcome in the world. My house was silent. A blessed silence that contrasted with the shouting in that restaurant and Vanessa's shrill complaints. Closing the door behind me, I left out the sticky afternoon heat, and symbolically, I left out my son and his family. I took off the low-heeled shoes that squeezed my bunions and felt the coolness of the terracotta tiles on my feet through my stockings. I walked toward my office. I call it an office, but it is really just a small room at the end of the hallway that smells of wood wax and dried lavender. That is where I keep my life, the real one, not the one Robert thinks I lead. He thinks I spend my days knitting baby clothes or watching soap operas, waiting for death to take me. Poor fool. I sat at my desk, a solid mahogany piece I bought at an auction 30 years ago. I ran my hand over the varnished surface, feeling the grain of the wood. My heart, which had been galloping like a runaway horse in the restaurant, was now beating with a slow, powerful rhythm, like a war drum. It was time to take inventory, not of flowers or pots, but of truths. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one I always keep locked. I wear the key around my neck next to my scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, hidden under my blouse. I pulled out a heavy metal box, one of those old olive green ones people used to keep tools or money in back in the day. It was not a pretty box. It had scratches and a dent on one corner, but it was impenetrable. Inside that box, there was no jewelry, no old photos of better times. There were papers. Papers that were worth more than all the gold Vanessa dreamed of hanging around her neck. The first thing I took out was the black notebook. That is what I call it. It is a hardcover accounting ledger, with the corners worn out from use. I opened it on the desk and looked for a pen. My fingers, the ones Robert despised for being old and stained, turned the pages filled with my tight, angular handwriting. "Let us see, Robert," I muttered to myself, adjusting my reading glasses. Date, May 15th. Reason: Mom, I need to change the tires on the SUV for your grandson's safety. Amount: $1,600. I turned the page. August 20th. Reason: Georgie's private school tuition went up and we are short. Amount: $1,000. Marginal note. That same day, Vanessa showed up with a brand new designer handbag. I kept reading, page after page, year after year. Loans for businesses that never existed, for fabricated medical emergencies, for vacations that were supposedly for work. The total sum at the bottom of the last page was outrageous. With that money, I could have bought a beach house or traveled through Europe twice. But I had given it to him. Out of love. Out of guilt. Out of that stupid idea that a mother must give everything until she is left empty. But today's page was blank. I took the pen, and with a steady hand I wrote, Sunday, October 12th. Vance's Harbor Seafood and Steakhouse. Attempted emotional extortion and public humiliation. Amount: dignity is priceless, but the choice is going to cost them dearly. I set the notebook aside and reached back into the metal box. I took out a thick manila envelope tied with a red string. Robert and Vanessa believed that I had sold my 3 shops in the wholesale flower district 5 years ago for a fixed lump sum that was running out. They thought I lived off the remnants of that sale. How little they knew the woman who gave birth to them and fed them. I untied the string and spread out the documents. They were lease agreements. I never sold the shops. I would never sell the heart of my hard work. I rented them to Arthur Miller, the biggest orchid importer in the state, and to Mrs. Shirley, the queen of funeral arrangements. The monthly rent those shops generated was higher than the salary Robert made at his mediocre office job, if he even still had a job, because lately his stories were not adding up. That rent went into a savings account at a bank Robert did not know about, an account that did not have a debit card, just an old-school savings passbook to avoid temptation and digital footprints. I looked at the papers and felt a wave of power course through my veins. For years, I played small. I played the part of someone who did not understand modern finance, the one who needed help using the ATM, just so they would feel useful, so they would feel superior. What a huge mistake. By playing the fool, I fed the monster of their greed. I got up and walked over to the full-length mirror hanging on the closet door. I looked at myself. I saw my wrinkles, yes. I saw my white hair pulled back into a severe bun. I saw my body that no longer had the wasp waist of a 20-year-old. But I also saw my eyes. They were dark, deep, and they shined with a fierce intelligence that I had kept hidden beneath layers of maternal submission. They underestimated you, Adelaide, I told my reflection. They thought you were an old sheep ready for the slaughterhouse. They forgot that you were the one who negotiated with the loaders' unions when your husband died. They forgot that you chased the loan sharks out of the market with your cane back in 1985. I stepped closer to the mirror, my nose almost touching the glass. You are not a victim. You are the boss. The house phone started ringing in the living room, a long, demanding ring. I knew who it was. I did not need caller ID to know that Robert would be on the other line, probably furious, scared, or a pathetic mix of both. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3, 4 rings. Silence reigned once more. I went back to the desk and took the last document out of the box. It was the most important one of all. 10 years ago, when Robert bought his house in that pretentious residential neighborhood he could not afford, I co-signed as a guarantor. But I did not sign as just any guarantor. My lawyer, attorney Richard Henderson, a sly old fox who had courted me in our youth and who remained my loyal friend, had drafted a special clause. A clause that stated that, in the event Robert missed 3 consecutive payments, the debt did not pass to me directly, but rather I acquired the rights to the property to liquidate the debt. Robert never read the fine print. He was too busy showing off the stone facade to his friends. I knew from the bank letters that arrived at my address by mistake, a mistake I never corrected, that Robert was 2 months behind. Next month would be the 3rd. The reality was brutal. I had control over his roof. I had control over his early inheritance. I had control over everything, and they treated me as if I were a burden, an old piece of furniture taking up space in the hallway. A dry laugh escaped my throat. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who discovers she has been sitting on a treasure chest while begging for bread. I sat down again and grabbed a sheet of letterhead. My old company letterhead, Adelaide's floral designs, quality and distinction. The ink of the logo was a little faded by time, but the name still commanded respect in the trade. I started writing, not a love letter nor an apology. I was drafting an action plan. Step 1, cut off the immediate cash flow. No more paid family Sundays, cell phone top-ups, or loans for emergencies. Step 2, visit Mr. Henderson tomorrow first thing in the morning. I need to execute the property clause or, at the very least, use it to scare them until they wet their pants. Step 3, reclaim my life. I stopped at the 3rd point, reclaim my life. What did that mean? For years, my life had been them. My schedule revolved around their needs. My expenses were limited so I could give to them. If I took that away, what did I have left? I looked out the window at my small backyard. It was a little neglected. My rose bushes needed pruning. The bougainvillea had grown wild. I have everything left, I whispered. I had my time left. I had my money left. I had my dignity left. I could go back to the flower district, not to work like a pack mule, but to stroll around, to greet my old friends, to eat quesadillas without Vanessa counting my calories or looking at me in disgust for getting salsa on my fingers. I could travel. I could paint the house canary yellow if I felt like it. Suddenly, the front doorbell rang. Not the phone, but the street doorbell. They rang it insistently, almost violently. Mom, open up. I know you are in there. I saw the light in the office." Robert's voice yelled from the sidewalk. He sounded agitated, desperate. I sat frozen in my chair. Maternal instinct, that traitor living in your gut, wanted to make me stand up, run to open the door, ask him if he was okay, if they had been able to get out of the restaurant without legal trouble. I pictured Georgie scared, Vanessa crying, but then I remembered the waiter's gaze. I remembered the "you pay, old lady." I remembered the $1 bills rolling across the tablecloth. No, that Adelaide no longer lived here. I stood up slowly, leaning on my eagle-headed cane. I walked to the office window, facing the street, but kept myself hidden behind the lace curtain. I saw Robert's car double-parked. Vanessa was in the passenger seat, with her arms crossed and a face of pure fury. Georgie was in the back, his nose glued to his cell phone, oblivious to his parents' drama. Robert was hitting my gate with an open palm. "Mom, please, we had to leave Vanessa's watch as a deposit. It is a humiliation. Open the door." I looked at my wristwatch. It was 6 in the evening. At this time, I was usually preparing dinner for whenever they decided to drop by surprise to grab a bite. Today, there was no dinner. I went back to my desk. I picked up the phone, but not to answer the door. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Hello?" A raspy voice answered on the third ring. "Richard, it is Adelaide," I said, with a voice I did not even recognize myself, firm, clear, unwavering. Adelaide, what a treat for my ears. To what do I owe this Sunday miracle? I thought you would be with the golden boy and his family. The boy has grown up, Richard, and he just sprouted some very large debts. I need to see you tomorrow at 9 in your office. Get the mortgage papers and the shop files ready." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by a whistle of admiration. "Well, well, the lioness finally woke up. I will be waiting for you, Adelaide. I will bring the coffee and the donuts." I hung up the phone. The banging on the door continued, but it sounded distant, as if it were happening in another dimension. I put the black notebook and the documents back in the metal box. I locked the box. I locked the desk drawer. I headed to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, hot and sweet, just how I like it. I sat in my favorite armchair in the living room, turned on the old radio to listen to some old ballads, and turned the volume up just enough to drown out the shouting from the street. Outside, my son kept yelling, believing he had a right to my peace. Inside, I drank my tea, savoring every sip as if it were the nectar of the gods. The war had begun, and for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of losing my son. I was only afraid of not having found myself sooner. Tomorrow, when the sun came up, Mr. Henderson and I would have a very interesting conversation. And Robert? Well, Robert was going to discover that the most beautiful flowers in the market always grow in the toughest fertilizer. I woke up before the sun dared to paint the roofs of the neighborhood orange. I did not need an alarm clock. The 40-year habit of waking up early to receive the flower trucks at the market was still engraved in my bones, more punctual than any Swiss watch. But that morning the air felt different. There was no rush, no anxiety over checking if the tulips had arrived wilted. There was, instead, a cold and metallic calm, like the blade of freshly sharpened pruning shears. I got up and went straight to the closet. I pushed aside the resigned grandmother dresses, the ones with faded floral prints that Vanessa said suited my age. I searched the back, protected by a plastic cover that smelled of mothballs and memories. For my battle armor, a navy blue tailored suit, straight cut and made of thick fabric. I had bought it 15 years ago to negotiate with the city council when they wanted to relocate us. It was a little loose around the waist, but the shoulders fit perfectly. I smoothed my hair, gathering every white strand into an impeccable bun, and put on a little terracotta lipstick. Looking in the mirror, Adelaide the retiree had disappeared. Adelaide, the boss of the flower district, was back. I left the house without making a sound. My phone, which I had turned on only to check the time, had 14 missed calls from Robert and 5 voicemails that I did not bother to listen to. I knew what they said. Complaints, blame, blackmail, the usual repertoire. I hailed a cab on the avenue, no asking the neighbor or waiting for the bus today. I was going downtown to Mr. Henderson's office. The building was old, one of those with gated elevators that screech like stray cats in heat. But it smelled of floor wax and freshly brewed coffee, a smell that calmed me. Mr. Henderson was waiting for me with his door open and 2 mugs of steaming coffee on his desk, which was a sea of folders and cigar ash. "You look stunning, Adelaide," he said, getting up with some difficulty. "But with that old-school gentleman charm you do not see anymore. That blue suits you. It makes you look dangerous." "That is the idea, Richard," I replied, sitting down and placing my eagle-headed cane on his papers. "I did not come to drink tea and chat about the weather. I came to execute." Mr. Henderson smiled, showing his tobacco-stained teeth, and opened a beige folder. "I have it all ready. I checked the payments for Robert's mortgage. Sure enough, the 3rd payment was due yesterday. The bank has already issued the internal alert, but since you are the guarantor with an immediate subrogation clause, the debt is yours, and the house too, if you decide so." I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. It was strong and bitter, exactly what I needed. "I do not want to take his house away yet, Richard. I am not a monster. I want him to feel the fear. I want him to understand that the roof he sleeps under is not held up by his delusions of grandeur, but by my signature. So, do we proceed with the notice of intent to execute? He asked, his pen hovering in the air. Proceed and make sure it reaches him today at his office so he cannot hide it from Vanessa. And I want you to cancel the supplementary credit card, the one ending in 49589. Mr. Henderson arched an eyebrow. The one your daughter-in-law uses for her beauty treatments? That exact one. The Botox and massages on my dime are over. And one more thing. I took the lease agreement for my shops out of my bag. I want you to notify the bank that the rent from these shops will no longer be deposited into the joint account I have with Robert. Open a new account for me, solely in my name, leaving absolutely no trace for him. As I signed the documents, I felt a strange mix in my stomach. It was not guilt. It was like when you have to prune a diseased branch to save the rosebush. It hurts to cut it, yes, but if you leave it, the blight eats everything. My son was that branch, rotted by comfort and my own indulgence. I left the office 2 hours later, with the mid-morning sun hitting my face. I felt light, as if I had taken a bag of cement off my back. My phone vibrated again. It was Vanessa. I let it ring until it stopped. Instead of going back home to lock myself in, I decided to go to my true home, the wholesale flower district. The smell hit me before I walked in. An intoxicating mix of wet earth, cut stems, marigolds, roses, and the spicy aroma of the street food tacos at the entrance. The noise was deafening to anyone else, but to me it was music. The shouts of the loaders, the haggling, the wheelbarrows rolling over the concrete. I walked down the narrow aisles, dodging water buckets and mountains of foliage. My cane tapped with authority. "Miss Adelaide! It is a miracle seeing you around here," yelled Tank, a huge man who sold sunflowers and whom I had known since he was a skinny kid who could barely lift a box. "I am just doing an inspection, Tank, making sure you are not pulling a fast one on anyone," I joked, and he let out a laugh that made his cheeks jiggle. I kept moving forward until I reached my old shops, now rented by Arthur Miller. They were spotless, full of exotic orchids that were worth more than Vanessa's watch. I stood there, watching the hustle and bustle, feeling like a queen in her exile. That was when my phone rang again, but this time it was not a call. It was a bank notification. Card declined, merchant, the Summit Spa and Wellness. Amount, $700. I smiled. The first domino had just fallen. I sat on a wooden stool near Mrs. Patty's juice stand, an old friend who knew more market secrets than the night watchman himself. I ordered an orange juice and settled in to wait. I knew Robert would look for me. I knew he would track my phone because I had given him access to my location for safety reasons years ago. And I knew he would come here because no one was at my house, and he was desperate. I did not have to wait long. 40 minutes later, I saw a figure that completely clashed with the environment. Robert, in his gray office suit, his tie loosened, and his face red with sweat and rage, was pushing his way through the crowd. He looked with disgust at the wet floor, protecting his Italian shoes from the grime. I watched him approach the way you watch a summer storm rolling in. The people stepped aside, not out of respect, but because he was radiating the energy of a rabid dog. "Mom," he yelled when he saw me sitting there, calmly drinking my juice. "What the hell is wrong with you? Are you crazy?" Mrs. Patty stopped squeezing oranges and crossed her arms, giving my son a dirty look. 2 nearby loaders stopped, leaning on their hand trucks. They were not in his fancy restaurant here. They were on my turf. "Good afternoon, son. Would you like some juice?" I asked without getting up. Robert reached me panting. He ran his hand over his sweaty, balding head. "Stop playing games," he roared, slamming his fist on the wooden counter. "Vanessa called me crying. Her card was declined at the spa. She went through the embarrassment of her life, and then my secretary calls me to tell me an envelope from a lawyer just arrived. What is this, Mom? Are you suing me?" He spoke so fast that he was spitting a little. His face was a mask of disbelief. He could not process that the little old lady had teeth. "I am not suing you, Robert. I am just putting things in order," I said in a calm voice. That low voice I used to fire thieving employees without causing a scene. "The card was canceled because it is not yours. It is mine, and the money that pays for it is also mine." "But it is for emergencies," he whined, sounding like a 5-year-old child. "A hot stone massage is not an emergency, Robert. An emergency is when a pipe bursts or you get sick. And I assume that is what you work for, right?" Robert looked around, realizing we had an audience. Several vendors were watching the scene with blatant curiosity. He lowered his voice a little, but the venomous tone remained. "Mom, please do not do this to me now. We are going through a rough patch. You have that money sitting there, rotting away. You are selfish. What does it cost you to help us? I am your son." I stood up slowly, leaned on my cane, and took a step toward him. I got very close, so close I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the sweat of his fear. "Precisely because you are my son, Robert. Because I gave birth to you and raised you among these very flowers. I gave you everything. I gave you an education. I gave you a car. I gave you the down payment for your house. And what did you do?" I locked my eyes on his. "You threw a bill in my face and called me old lady in front of your wife and son. You treated me as if I were a nuisance." "It was a joke. You are exaggerating because of your age," he defended himself, taking a step back. "My age?" I let out a dry chuckle. "My age has given me something you lack: memory. I have a notebook, Robert. A black notebook where I have written down every single dollar you have bled from me in 20 years. Do you know how much it adds up to?" He turned pale. He knew I was meticulous, but he did not know to what extent. "I do not care about your notebooks. Fix this with the bank. I need that card active, and I need you to withdraw that threat on the house. If my partners find out my property is at risk, my business will collapse." There it was, the real motive. It was not love. It was not worry. It was his image, his precious and fragile image. "The business," I repeated, savoring the word. "Speaking of business, did you know that the shops you see right across there, the ones you thought I sold, make me more in a month than your manager's salary?" Robert's eyes widened like saucers. He turned his head toward Arthur Miller's shops. Then he looked at me, then back at the shops. "What? But you said you sold them. You said you were living off your savings." I said what you needed to hear to leave me alone. But the lie is over, son. I own this. I own my house. And technically, if you do not pay what you owe the bank before Friday, I am going to own yours too. The silence that followed was absolute, despite the bustle of the market. Robert opened his mouth and closed it, like a fish out of water. Reality was crashing down on him like a concrete slab. His mother, the harmless old lady, had her boot on his neck, and he had not even realized it. "You would not dare," he whispered with a trembling voice. "You would leave your grandson on the street." "Never," I replied firmly. "I would welcome my grandson into my house with open arms. Him, yes. But you and your wife, you too could use a lesson in what it takes to earn a roof over your heads." Robert looked at me with a mix of hatred and respect that I had never seen in him before. For the first time in years, he saw me. He truly saw me. "This is ridiculous. I am going to talk to Richard. I am going to contest whatever you signed. You are senile, Mom. I can claim that you are not in your right mind." I was expecting that threat. It was the coward's way out. "Try it," I said, and my voice sounded so cold that Mrs. Patty stopped wiping the counter. "Richard has medical certificates for me from every single month, signed by neurologists precisely to prevent some smart aleck from trying to declare me incompetent. I have been preparing for this for a long time, Robert. Longer than you think." He took a step back, defeated for the moment, but with the look of someone planning their revenge. "This is not over, Mom. You are going to regret humiliating me." "You already humiliated me yesterday, son. Now we are even," I said, turning around to look at my flowers. "And by the way, if you want to eat, the street tacos at the entrance are really good. They cost a couple of bucks. Let us see if you have enough." I heard his footsteps walking away, fast and furious, getting lost in the crowd. I did not turn around. I did not need to see him to know he was running to his car to call Vanessa and scream. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mrs. Patty handing me another glass of juice. "Oh, Adelaide, you raise vipers," she muttered, shaking her head. "And they will bite your hand, Patty." I finished the sentence, taking the glass. But they forgot that this old eagle still has talons, and I am just starting to use them. I drank the juice in one gulp. It tasted sweet, but with an acidic undertone. That is how victory tasted to me. Necessary, nourishing, but with a flavor that reminds you that nothing is free in this life. I took out my phone. I had a message from Richard. Letter delivered to Robert's office. Receipt signed. The bank confirmed the freeze on the joint accounts. Next step. My fingers flew over the keyboard as agile as in my best days. Next step. The charity dinner on Saturday. Vanessa is the organizer, right? Get me an invitation. I am going to go. And I am going to wear the most stunning dress you have in your late wife's trunk. I put my phone away and looked up at the tin roof of the market, where rays of light filled with golden dust filtered through. Robert thought the war was over money. Poor fool. The war was for respect, and the final battle would not be in a courtroom or in a house. It would be on their own turf, in front of all those people they wanted to impress so badly. If they wanted a show, Adelaide was going to give them a performance they would never forget. The emerald green velvet dress that Richard got from his late wife's trunk fit me like a glove, even though it smelled slightly of old lavender and mothballs, a scent that to me was the perfume of victory. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror before leaving. I did not wear flashy jewelry, only a necklace of real pearls that my husband gave me when Robert was born, and in my right hand my trusty cane with the silver eagle head handle. Tonight the eagle was going to hunt. The cab dropped me off in front of the steps of the country club. It was not a luxury car like the ones lining up for valet parking, those shiny Mercedes and BMWs that Vanessa adored so much. The cab driver, a kind man named Bill, opened the door for me. "Have fun, Miss Adelaide, and do not let any snob look down their nose at you," he told me, winking an eye. "Do not worry, Bill. Today others are the ones who will be bowing their heads," I replied, giving him a generous tip. I climbed the marble steps with a slow but firm pace, the sound of my cane hitting the stone. Clack, clack, clack. It announced my arrival better than any trumpet. At the entrance, a young security guard was checking the guest list with a furrowed brow. "Good evening, ma'am. Your name?" he asked without looking up much. "Adelaide," I said simply. "I am here as a special guest of Attorney Henderson and the Board of Directors." The boy searched his tablet and his eyes widened a little more when he found me. "Oh yes, I apologize, Miss Adelaide. Please go right in. They are waiting for you at the head table." I entered the ballroom. The air conditioning was so strong it chilled my bones, but the atmosphere was heated. There were immense crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements that I recognized immediately. They were from the competition at Paradise Florals, and they looked a little sad, with the rose petals already opening too much, and a crowd of people dressed in formal wear drinking champagne. My hawk eyes took 3 seconds to locate my prey. Vanessa was near the bar, waving her hands at a man in a suit who seemed to be the banquet manager. She was wearing a loud red dress, way too tight, and you could see the sweat on her forehead despite the layers of makeup. Robert was by her side with a glass in his hand, looking everywhere with that cornered animal expression he had at the market. I moved toward them. People stepped aside as I passed, not because they knew me, but because a 72-year-old woman walking with that kind of determination in the middle of a party for pretty people generates a magnetic curiosity. When I was 10 feet away, Robert saw me. He almost choked on his drink. He nudged Vanessa, who spun around so fast she almost lost her balance on her stiletto heels. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa hissed, approaching me like a viper, lowering her voice so her high society friends would not hear her. "I told you not to come. This is a charity event, not a nursing home." "Good evening to you too, daughter-in-law," I replied with an icy smile. "I see the floral arrangements leave a lot to be desired. You should have hired a professional." "Mom, go home," Robert intervened, stepping between us and pushing me slightly toward the exit. "You do not have an invitation. You are going to make a fool of yourself. Please do not ruin our night. We already have enough problems." "Problems?" I asked innocently, even though I knew exactly what he was referring to. "Like the fact that the banquet manager is denying you premium liquor service because the deposit check bounced this morning?" Vanessa's face transformed. It went from anger to pure panic in a second. "How do you know that?" she murmured, glancing sideways at the manager who was still waiting with a scowl on his face. "Robert, do something. Get her out of here. If my friends see her—" "Your friends are going to see something very interesting tonight, Vanessa," I said, pushing Robert aside with a sharp movement of my cane. "And I am not leaving. In fact, I think I am going to take my seat." At that moment, Attorney Henderson appeared through the crowd wearing a tuxedo that smelled like mothballs just like my dress, but with a grin from ear to ear. "Adelaide, my dear, you arrived just in time," he exclaimed with a powerful voice, drawing the attention of nearby groups. "The foundation president was just asking for you." Robert and Vanessa were petrified. "Richard, what are you doing here with my mother?" Robert asked, confused. "You do not know?" Richard let out a theatrical laugh. "Your mother is not just a guest, kids. She is the anonymous benefactor who has been covering the organization's deficits for the last year. Well, she was anonymous until today." Vanessa let out an audible gasp. She brought a hand to her chest, where she was wearing a fake costume jewelry necklace because her real gold one was in the pawn shop. That is impossible. She has no money. She lives off her pension?" Vanessa stammered, looking at me as if I had grown 2 heads. "Oh, honey," I said, stepping closer to her until I could see the fear in her dilated pupils. "Never confuse frugality with poverty. Just because I do not waste money on designer bags does not mean I cannot buy the whole store if I feel like it." The banquet manager, who had been listening discreetly, approached us. He ignored Vanessa and Robert and addressed me directly. "Miss Adelaide, it is an honor. Attorney Henderson informed us that you would be taking care of the outstanding balance for the event to release the full service." I took a checkbook out of my small handbag. Not the one from the joint account that Robert had drained so many times, a gold checkbook from a private corporate bank. "That is correct, young man," I said, pulling out my fountain pen, "but on one condition." "Whatever you say, ma'am." "I want it clearly announced who is paying for the wine and dinner tonight. I do not want any confusion about who gets the credit. My daughter-in-law here has worked very hard organizing. But the bills are being paid by Camellia Investments, meaning me." I signed the check with an elegant flourish and handed it to the manager, who made an almost exaggerated bow and ran off to the kitchen. Vanessa was shaking. Robert had his mouth open, unable to articulate a word. "Mom, Camellia Investments?" he asked with a threat of a voice. "Are those the owners of the industrial lots on the north side of the city? And the shops at the flower district and a couple of warehouses at the wholesale market," I confirmed, enjoying every syllable. "Did you never wonder where the money for your private college came from, Robert? Did you think selling carnations for a few cents paid for all that?" "But you never said anything," he whispered, "because I wanted you to be a good man, to work for what is yours without waiting for an inheritance. But I failed. I created a parasite," I said with sadness but without hesitating. "And you, Vanessa, you always mocked my hands full of dirt. Well, those dirty hands are paying for your party, so you do not look like a fraud in front of all of high society." At that moment, the ballroom lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the stage. The foundation president, an elegant woman named Mrs. Winston, took the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Before we begin dinner, I want to thank our organizer, Vanessa." Vanessa tried to smile, waiting for her moment of glory, smoothing her dress. "But above all," Mrs. Winston continued, "I want to ask for a round of applause for the woman who has made it possible for this foundation to keep operating, and who today, generously, saved this evening. A woman who is a pillar of industry and a shining example of hard work. Miss Adelaide, please join me." The applause was polite at first, but when Richard started clapping loudly, many followed suit. People started murmuring. "Who is she? Vanessa's mother-in-law? The flower lady?" I looked at my son and my daughter-in-law. They were defeated. Vanessa had tears of rage in her eyes, her makeup smudged in one corner. Robert looked at the floor, unable to hold my gaze. "Excuse me," I said softly. "They are calling me." I walked toward the stage. I felt the eyes of hundreds of people fixed on my straight back. I climbed the steps with the help of my cane. Mrs. Winston hugged me. I took the microphone. My hands were not shaking. They were as steady as when I cut thick rose stems. "Good evening," I said, and my voice rang clear through the speakers. "Many of you do not know me. I am Adelaide. For 40 years, I got up at 4 in the morning to sell flowers. My hands are rough, and my knees ache when it is going to rain." I paused. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, likes to say that my pension is useless, that I am a burden. I searched the crowd for Vanessa with my eyes. The spotlight hit her by accident or perhaps by Richard's instruction. She looked small, insignificant. But tonight I want to tell you all something. Honest work, even if it is humble, builds empires. And appearances, no matter how luxurious, if they have no substance, will collapse like a house of cards. There was a collective murmur. Vanessa covered her face with her hands. "Enjoy your dinner," I concluded. "It is paid for with the sweat of an old florist. And remember, the roots of a tree are ugly and covered in dirt, but without them, the branches dry up and die." I stepped down from the stage amidst a standing ovation. It was not a polite applause. It was an applause born of respect. I saw several important businessmen nodding their heads. I saw bejeweled women looking at me with admiration, perhaps recognizing the strength that many of them lacked. When I returned to the table, Robert and Vanessa were no longer alone. They were surrounded by a group of committee ladies, but not to congratulate them. "Vanessa, darling, we did not know you had such a powerful mother-in-law," said a woman with a diamond necklace, using that venomous high society tone. "What a shame you told us she was a senile old lady who begged you for money. It seems it is the other way around, is it not?" Vanessa did not know where to hide. Robert tried to explain something, but no one paid him any attention. Seeing me arrive, the group parted like the Red Sea. "Miss Adelaide, please sit here," said the diamond lady, offering me her own chair. "We want to know your story. How did you start your business? My husband is looking for investors for an agricultural project and—" I sat down, settling my cane. I looked at my son, who was standing, excluded from the circle of power, holding an empty glass. "Robert!" I called out to him. He looked up, hopeful. "Go to the bar and bring me a mineral water with ice and lemon, and make sure it is cold." "Yes, Mom." "Yes, of course," he replied, running to follow the order as if he were a cadet. Vanessa tried to sit next to me, but I put my purse on the empty chair. "That chair is taken, dear. Richard is going to sit there. You have a lot to do, making sure the waiters do not steal the silverware, do you not? It is your job as the organizer." Vanessa looked at me with hatred, but also with deep fear. She understood, finally, who held all the cards. She turned around and marched off toward the kitchen, her head down, dragging her red dress like a flag of surrender. Robert returned with my mineral water. He handed it to me with a trembling hand. "Here you go, Mom." "Thank you, son." I took a sip. It was perfect. Now, if you will excuse me, I am closing a deal here with your fake aunts. We will talk on Monday at Richard's office. We have to discuss the terms of your eviction or your new lease agreement if you decide to act like a man. Robert grew even paler, if that was even possible. He nodded awkwardly and walked away, getting lost among the tables in the back, seeking the shadows, while I stayed under the light of the chandeliers. The dinner passed with laughter and anecdotes. It turned out that many of those wealthy women felt lonely, ignored by their children or husbands, and they found in my stories from the Flower District an authenticity that was missing in their plastic lives. I became the queen of the night, not because of my money, but because of my truth. At the end of the evening, as the waiters began to clean up, Richard walked me to the exit. "You were brilliant, Adelaide. Brutal, but brilliant," he said, lighting a cigar on the terrace. "I just gave them a dose of reality, Richard. I taught them that respect is not inherited, it is earned, and that money comes and goes, but dignity remains." I saw Robert and Vanessa arguing in the parking lot next to their car, which they probably still owed money on too. Vanessa was crying and hitting my son on the chest. Robert just stared at the ground. I felt no pity. I felt relief. The blindfold had fallen from my eyes and from theirs. Bill's cab, which I had asked to come back for me, pulled up in front of us. The security guard ran over to open my door, ignoring a Mercedes honking behind him. "Good night, Miss Adelaide," the boy said with a genuine bow. I got into the cab. I leaned back against the worn vinyl seat, exhausted but satisfied. It had been a long night. "Where to, boss?" Bill asked. "Home, Bill, to my house, which by the way is still mine and nobody else's." As the cab drove away from the country club, leaving behind the lights and the music, I took out my phone. I had a text message from Robert. "I am sorry, Mom. Can we talk tomorrow? I am scared." I smiled, stroking the eagle head of my cane. Fear is a good teacher when kindness did not work. "We will talk tomorrow, son," I murmured to the screen, but I set the terms. I looked out the window at the sleeping city. I was no longer the old woman who paid for her mineral water with counted coins. I was Adelaide, the matriarch, and on Monday, when the sun came up, the true reconstruction of my family would begin. Even if I had to tear down the rotten foundation first, the game was over. Now my reign was beginning. Monday dawned with that leaden gray that announces rain, but for me, the sky was crystal clear. I walked into Attorney Henderson's office at 9 o'clock on the dot. This time there was no coffee or donuts, just a leather folder on the table and 3 occupied chairs. Robert and Vanessa were seated in front of the desk, hunched over, like 2 children waiting to be scolded by the principal after breaking a window. Seeing me walk in, Robert stood up on reflex, something he had not done since he was 10 years old. Vanessa, wearing no makeup and with swollen eyes, kept her gaze glued to her clasped hands. The silence in the room weighed more than a sack of wet dirt. I sat in the main chair, the one Richard had saved for me, and rested my eagle-headed cane against the desk. The sound of wood against wood echoed like a judge's gavel. "Good morning," I said with the calm that comes from holding all the cards in the deck. "Good morning, Mom," Robert replied with a thread of a voice. Vanessa only nodded, fearful. Richard cleared his throat and opened the folder. "Well, as the legal representative of Miss Adelaide and administrator of Camellia Investments, I have drafted the new living agreement and debt restructuring plan." Robert swallowed hard. He loosened the knot of his tie, even though the air conditioning was blasting. "Mom, please, the house, do not take it away from us. It is all we have left," my son begged, his eyes welling up. There was no more arrogance, only the pure panic of someone staring into the abyss. I looked at him intently. I saw his trembling hands, those hands that had never carried anything heavier than a briefcase. "The house is already mine, Robert. Legally, the clause was executed on Friday," I said, and I watched the color drain from his face. But I am not a heartless loan shark. I am not going to throw you out on the street. However, the rules of the game have radically changed. I took my black notebook out of my purse and placed it on the table. Vanessa shuddered when she saw it. You will live in the house under a free use agreement, I continued. You will not pay rent in cash, because I know you do not have any. You will pay with work. Work? Vanessa asked, looking up for the first time. What kind of work? I do not know how to do manual labor. You are going to learn, dear. I smiled at her, not with sweetness, but with firmness. Richard has canceled all the supplementary cards. Starting today, you will receive a strict allowance for food and basic utilities. If you want luxuries, if you want imported wine or designer clothes, you will have to earn it. I turned to Robert. You, my son, are going to quit that manager position where you just keep a chair warm and pretend to work. I expect you tomorrow at 5 in the morning at the wholesale flower district. At the market? Robert's eyes widened like saucers. Mom, I have a college degree. I cannot be out there carrying boxes. What will my friends say? Your friends laughed at you on Saturday when they found out your mother was supporting you, I replied dryly. You are going to work with Arthur Miller. You are going to learn how to manage the warehouses. You are going to deal with the suppliers, and you are going to get your shoes dirty. If you last 6 months and Arthur gives me a good report, we will talk about giving you a real position in the management of my investments. If not, figure out your own life. Robert lowered his head. He knew he had no choice. It was either that or destitution. And you, Vanessa, I said, turning to her, you complained that my pension was only good for pocket change. You are going to take charge of the household accounting. I want receipts for every single dollar you spend from the allowance. Also, Mrs. Winston at the foundation needs volunteers to pack food boxes for underprivileged areas. I told her you would be delighted to go 3 times a week. Without a driver, of course. You will take public transportation. Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, to say it was an absolute humiliation, but she closed it when she saw my glare. She understood that the old lady was no longer playing games. And Georgie? Robert asked with concern. Do not pull him out of private school, Mom. It is not his fault. Exactly. It is not his fault he has useless parents, I said, softening my tone just a little. I will pay his tuition directly, and his expenses. But on one condition, he will spend his weekends with me. I want him to know his grandmother, not the walking ATM you painted me out to be. I want to teach him what respect is before it is too late. Richard slid the documents over to them to sign. The scratching of the pens on the paper was the only sound in the office for minutes. When they finished, they looked exhausted but strangely relieved. They had lost their status, yes, but they had gained an opportunity, even if they did not know it yet. Get out of here, I told them, putting away my notebook. I will see you on Sunday, and this time lunch is at my house. I cook. You wash the dishes. They walked out of the office with their heads hanging low. When the door closed, Richard let out a loud laugh and lit a cigar. You are tough, Adelaide, made of stainless steel. Steel is forged with hammer blows and fire, Richard. If I do not straighten them out now, they are going to break forever. The following weeks were a revelation. My routine changed, but this time on my own terms. I became a constant presence in the wholesale flower district again, not to carry boxes, but to supervise. I would sit in my folding chair next to Arthur Miller's stall, with my fan in one hand and my cane in the other, watching my son sweat buckets. At first, Robert was a disaster. He dropped boxes, grumbled about the heat, and looked at the other workers with disgust. But the market has its own magic. It does not tolerate the arrogant. The loaders, rough but noble people, started putting him in his place. Get moving, college boy, the flowers do not wait, Tank would yell at him when Robert stood there frozen staring at his cell phone. Little by little, I saw a change. One day, I saw him eating a street taco for lunch while sitting on an upside-down bucket, laughing at a joke from one of the drivers. He was no longer wearing his Italian suit, but jeans and a rolled-up cotton shirt. He had bags under his eyes, yes, but he looked more alive than he had in the last 10 years. "How is the boy doing, Arthur?" I asked one afternoon. "He is slow, Miss Adelaide, and he complains a lot, but he has a good head for numbers. Yesterday, he figured out that a supplier was overcharging us for freight. He argued with him and saved us some good money." I smiled. The merchant blood was in there. It just needed necessity to wake it up. Vanessa was a much tougher nut to crack. The first few weeks, she would arrive at my house with the receipts in a complete mess, crying because she did not have enough money left over for her hair dye. I did not give an inch. I taught her how to mend clothes, how to look for sales, how to cook with whatever was in the pantry. One Tuesday, she arrived with a plastic grocery bag full of vegetables. "I found tomatoes at half price at the local farmer's market," she told me, with a gleam of genuine pride in her eyes. "And I walked 3 extra blocks to save myself the second bus fare." "Well done, daughter," I told her, and I poured her a cup of tea. For the first time, we sat at the table without her checking her watch or criticizing my old furniture. We talked about recipes, about prices, about real life. I discovered that behind that mask of a frivolous woman, there was someone scared, someone who thought her only value was in her appearance. But my greatest victory was Georgie. The first weekend, he arrived at my house with his headphones on and a look of sheer boredom. I took him to the backyard, the one I had neglected. "We are going to prune the rose bushes," I told him, handing him some shears. "Grandma, I'm going to prick myself," he complained. "Then you get pricked. That is how you learn that beauty has a price." We spent the afternoon among thorns and dirt. At first he grumbled, but then he started asking questions. "Why do you cut that branch if it has leaves? How do you know which one is going to bloom?" I explained patience, strategy, and care to him. I told him stories about his father when he was a boy, about his grandfather. By the third weekend, Georgie was already leaving his cell phone by the entrance, without me having to ask. "Grandma, did you know the internet says these orchids are worth a lot of money? We should sell them online," he told me one day, his eyes shining with entrepreneurial enthusiasm. "All right, show me how this internet thing works," I replied. And there, between flower pots and screens, we connected. He taught me about technology, and I taught him about life. One day, while we were at the market, I saw a familiar face wiping down tables at Mrs. Patty's food stand. It was Mike, the waiter from Vance's Harbor Seafood and Steakhouse. He looked tired, but dignified. I approached him. "Young man, do you remember me?" Mike looked up and smiled shyly. "How could I forget you, ma'am? You are the one with the $8 and the life lesson. They fired me that same day for fraternizing with the customer." I felt a twinge of guilt, but I also saw an opportunity. Every cloud has a silver lining, Mike. I am opening a new distribution branch for fine event florals. I need someone who knows how to deal with people, someone who has patience and understands the value of dignity. Are you interested in being the floor manager?" The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Ma'am, I do not know anything about flowers." "You can learn about flowers. Decency, you cannot. And you have plenty of that. Come in tomorrow. The pay is good and the treatment is fair." That is how my little empire kept growing, not just in money, but in loyal people. Mike turned out to be an extraordinary manager, and Robert, to my surprise, did not feel jealous. Instead, he started learning from him. Seeing my son ask the former waiter for advice was one of the most beautiful lessons in humility I ever witnessed. Sunday arrived, 3 months after the incident at the restaurant. My house smelled of pot roast and freshly baked bread. The table was set, not with imported linen tablecloths, but with a brightly colored embroidered tablecloth I bought on a trip years ago. They arrived right on time. Robert's hands were a little rough, and he had a sunburn on the back of his neck, but he walked tall. Vanessa was wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and, miracle of miracles, she brought a dessert she had baked herself, a pie that looked a little lopsided but smelled absolutely delicious. Georgie ran in and gave me a kiss on the cheek before heading out to the backyard to check his rose bushes. "Sit down," I told them. I served the food. We ate with hearty appetites, talking about real things. Robert told us a funny story about a difficult customer at the flower market. Vanessa talked about Mrs. Winston and how an elderly woman at the food pantry had given her a hand-knit napkin that she now kept like a treasure. "This is delicious, Mom," Robert said, wiping his plate clean with a piece of bread. "Thank you, son." When we finished, a brief silence fell over the room. It was time for the bill. I reached into my purse, that worn leather bag they had despised so much. I pulled out my coin purse. Robert and Vanessa tensed up instinctively, remembering the humiliation at the restaurant. I took out a silver dollar coin. I placed it on the table. "This coin," I said, spinning it gently, "was the only thing I paid that day for my dignity. I thought it was the highest price I had ever paid in my life." They lowered their eyes, ashamed. "But I was wrong," I continued. "The real price was seeing you two lost, seeing that I had raised a weak man and welcomed an empty woman. That hurt me more than any poverty ever could." I took the coin and handed it to Georgie, who had just returned to the table. "Here, son, keep it. Let it always remind you that a person's worth is not in the credit card they carry, but in their ability to stand back up when life throws the bill in your face." Robert stood up from his chair, walked around the table, and approached me. He knelt down, something a man of his age and pride would never do, and took my old spotted hands in his. "Forgive me, Mom," he said with a broken voice. "I was an absolute fool. Thank you for not letting me fall, even though I gave you every reason to." I stroked his head, feeling his thinning hair and sweaty skin. He was my little boy again, but now, finally, he was starting to become a man. "Get up, Robert. Good men do not kneel. They get to work," I told him, though my own eyes welled up with tears too. Vanessa stood up and started clearing the plates without anyone having to tell her. "I will do the dishes, Mother." "You just rest," she said, and for the first time the word mother did not sound like an insult, but like family. I stayed seated at the head of the table, sipping my cinnamon tea. I listened to the water running in the kitchen, the clinking of dishes being washed by hands that previously only knew how to point and demand. I listened to Georgie explaining something about digital marketing for flowers to his dad. I looked out the window. The afternoon sun illuminated my garden. The rose bushes I had pruned with Georgie were full of new, strong buds, ready to produce the most beautiful flowers of the season. It had been a brutal pruning, yes. It had hurt to cut away the diseased branches. I had bled from the thorns. But seeing my family in the kitchen, laughing as they dried the dishes, I knew every tear and every shout had been worth it. I was no longer the old woman who was just in the way. I was Adelaide, the deep root that held up the entire tree, and my branches, at long last, were starting to provide some good shade. I grabbed my eagle-headed cane and stood up. I had to go to my office to check the weekly numbers because business never sleeps, and Camellia Investments had expansion plans. But first, I walked by the kitchen and left a sticky note on the refrigerator, right where Robert and Vanessa could see it. It read, in my sharp, firm handwriting, "The debt is settled for today. Tomorrow we open at 5 in the morning. Do not be late." I walked out into the hallway smiling. Life, just like roses, always finds a way to bloom again, as long as you have the courage to endure the winters and the wisdom to prune exactly when it is needed. And me? I still had a whole lot of gardening left to do.